On a bitterly cold night, Keanu Reeves noticed a woman huddled in the front seat of an old car, her baby wrapped in mismatched blankets, struggling to stay warm. The windows were fogged, and the dim glow of a street lamp barely illuminated the exhaustion on her face. The soft cries of the infant broke through the silence of the parking lot, a quiet plea against the harsh reality surrounding them. What Keanu did next would not only change their lives forever but also leave you absolutely speechless. Before we continue, let us know where you're watching from. And if you love stories like this, make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow we have another special story just for you. Keanu Reeves stepped out of the supermarket, two shopping bags hanging from his hand. The night air was crisp, a gentle breeze rustling the trees lining the lot. He adjusted the hood of his jacket, his sharp gaze instinctively scanning the surroundings. It was an old habit, staying observant, staying present. Despite the chaos of fame, these ordinary moments, shopping, waiting in checkout lines, loading groceries into the trunk, kept him grounded. His day had been long but fulfilling. Filming for his latest movie had wrapped earlier than expected, giving him rare free time to do something simple, something normal. He had always cherished these little slices of everyday life, moments where he could just be Keanu, not the Hollywood star. As he approached his car, something caught his eye. A beat-up old sedan sat in the farthest corner of the lot, its windows fogged over, its frame weathered by time. Pieces of clothing hung inside, swaying gently in the wind. Something about the scene felt off. His attention shifted to a woman pushing a line of shopping carts toward the collection area. Her clothes were worn, her movements slow, burdened with exhaustion. Every so often, she glanced around, as if making sure she wasn't being watched. Then, almost as if guided by instinct, Keanu's eyes flicked back to the car. The woman kept returning to it. A realization hit him. Was that car her home? A pang of unease settled in his chest. Hollywood had shown him wealth beyond imagination, but it had also taught him that not everyone shared in that privilege. He had seen struggle, known loss, understood what it meant to feel unseen. And now, in this parking lot, a story was unfolding before him, one that he couldn't ignore. Determined, he approached carefully. He didn't want to startle her, just to understand. Maybe even help. "Hey," he said gently, his voice warm and non-threatening. The woman, in the middle of adjusting a cart, froze. Her eyes met his for the briefest moment before darting away, as if afraid of being noticed. "Are you okay? Is there anything I can do?" She stiffened, gripping the cart handle tightly. "I'm fine. Thank you." Her tone was clipped, guarded. She took a small step back, her body language making it clear she didn't want a conversation. Keanu nodded, respecting her space. "All right, but if you need anything, I'll be around." She didn't respond. Instead, she turned quickly, walking toward the old car. He watched as she opened the door and climbed inside. And then he saw it. Through the hazy glass, a small shape shifted in her arms. The baby. Keanu's breath hitched. His chest tightened as he processed the reality in front of him. He could have walked away, could have driven home and let this moment fade into memory. But he wouldn't. Not this time. As he slid into his own car, his hands tightened around the steering wheel. He cast one last glance toward the woman and her child. The image was burned into his mind. And as he started the engine, one thing was clear: this wasn't over. The next morning, Keanu Reeves found himself back in the same parking lot. The thought of the woman and her child had haunted him through the night. He could have ignored it, convinced himself it wasn't his place to interfere. But something about the situation wouldn't let him turn away. He parked in the same spot as before. His eyes scanned the lot. The old sedan was still there. The windows were fogged once more, the familiar pieces of clothing still draped inside. A few feet away, he spotted her again. This time, she was carrying a plastic bag as she walked toward the vehicle. Keanu exhaled slowly. He didn't want to overwhelm her, didn't want to make her feel like a spectacle. So, instead of approaching her directly, he opted for a different gesture. Reaching into his car, he grabbed two things: a sealed bottle of mineral water and a brand new blanket, still in its original packaging. He walked up to the woman's car and, without a word, placed them on the hood. He positioned them carefully, making sure they were clearly visible but not intrusive. Then he stepped back and waited. Minutes later, the car door creaked open. The woman hesitated before peeking outside. Her gaze fell upon the items. She froze. Slowly, she reached for the blanket, fingers brushing over the soft fabric. Her eyes darted around the lot, searching. Keanu remained in his car, watching from a distance. He didn't need thanks. He just needed her to know she wasn't alone. And this was only the beginning. Keanu remained still, giving her the space to decide. He knew that trust was fragile, and he didn't want to push too hard. For a moment, she hesitated. Her fingers hovered over the items as if debating whether accepting them would be admitting defeat. But then, with a deep breath, she finally reached out. First, the bottle of water. Then, the blanket. As she clutched them to her chest, Keanu saw her lips move, murmuring something too soft for him to hear. A prayer? A thank you? He would never know. Without another word, she turned and hurried back into the car, shutting the door quickly, as if sealing herself away from the world once more. Keanu exhaled, a mix of relief and frustration coursing through him. He had done something, but deep down, it didn't feel like enough. The image of her and the baby lingered in his mind. On the third day, he returned. Pulling into the same parking lot, he spotted her immediately. The same worn clothes. The same tired expression. She was pushing carts again, her movements sluggish, drained. Keanu waited. He didn't want to startle her. This time, he needed to be more careful. When she was near her car, he took a step forward. "Hi," he said, his voice soft, barely above a whisper. She turned sharply, eyes wide with surprise and discomfort. "I'm the guy who left the water and blanket yesterday," he explained. "I hope that didn't make you uncomfortable." She studied him, wary but curious. "You..." Her voice was laced with uncertainty, her guard still up. "Why?" The word came quickly, almost accusatory. Keanu gave a small shrug. "I saw you yesterday and thought you might need them. That's all." She remained silent, her grip tightening around the cart handle. "I understand if you don't want to talk to me," he continued, careful not to push too hard. "I'm not here to invade your space." She hesitated. Then, after what felt like an eternity, she whispered, "Thank you for the water and the blanket." The words were cautious, as if saying them made her vulnerable. Keanu nodded, sensing the weight behind them. "I just want to help, if you'll let me. And if you don't, that's fine too. But sometimes, accepting help isn't weakness. It's just a way to move forward." She didn't reply, but something in her posture shifted. It was subtle, the slightest loosening of tension in her shoulders, the smallest crack in her defenses. He took it as a sign of progress. Just as he was about to turn back to his car, a sound stopped him in his tracks. A baby's muffled cry. Keanu's gaze flicked to the old sedan. Through the fogged window, he could just make out the small shape stirring inside. The woman's expression tightened. Without a word, she rushed to the car, opened the door, and scooped the baby into her arms. She rocked him gently, whispering reassurances. Keanu hesitated. He didn't want to intrude, but he couldn't ignore what he had just seen. "Do you need anything for him?" he asked softly. "Formula? Diapers? Anything?" She froze. For a split second, her pride seemed to win. He could see it in her eyes, the instinct to refuse, to insist she was fine. But then, something shifted. The mother inside her, the part that would do anything for her child. "What? I need milk," she admitted, her voice barely audible. Keanu nodded. "Wait here. I'll be back in a few minutes." He didn't give her time to refuse. Without another word, he turned and headed toward the supermarket. When he returned, he carried a small bag filled with supplies, powdered milk, diapers, baby wipes. As he handed them over, she looked at him with more suspicion than before. But she didn't refuse. She took the items slowly, carefully, as if they were the most valuable things she had ever held. "Thank you," she murmured, barely above a whisper. As she adjusted the baby in her arms, Keanu stood beside her. "I know it's none of my business," he said gently, "but if you ever need anything else, I'll be around." She hesitated. Then, for the first time, She spoke without the usual defensiveness. They weren't supposed to be like this. Her voice was quiet, but the pain in it was deafening. Keanu didn't need to ask what she meant. He already knew. That sentence wasn't just a lament. It was a silent cry for help. And in that moment, Keanu realized this wasn't just a passing encounter. This was the beginning of something much bigger. The next day, Keanu returned to the parking lot. The scene looked the same, the old car, the worn-out woman. But something about her felt different. She wasn't inside the vehicle this time. Instead, she was standing just outside, cradling the baby in her arms. Her gaze was distant, lost in thought. Keanu knew this was a moment that required care. "Hey," he greeted, keeping his distance. She looked up, startled, but not as defensive as before. "You came back," she said, her voice carrying more curiosity than fear. Keanu offered a small smile. "I said I'd be around." There was a pause. "I hope you didn't feel pressured yesterday." She shook her head slowly. "No, it was kind of you." A step forward, a crack in the walls she had built. He knew this was the right time to try something more. "Can I sit?" he asked, motioning toward the curb near her car. She hesitated, glancing down at the baby. Then, after a long pause, she nodded. Keanu sat down, resting his arms on his knees. He let the silence settle before speaking again. "You don't have to tell me anything you're not comfortable sharing," he said. "But, can I ask your name?" She studied him for a moment before answering. "Emily." He nodded, sincerity in his voice. "Nice to meet you, Emily." A small shift, a breath of trust. "And the little one?" he asked, nodding toward the baby in her arms. She glanced down, her expression softening. "Oliver." Keanu smiled. "Oliver's a strong name. I like it." Something inside her seemed to thaw. For the first time, Emily's posture relaxed, just slightly. She was still cautious, still guarded, but for the first time since he had met her, she didn't seem so alone. And that was enough for now. Keanu listened intently, his heart heavy with every word Emily spoke. He could see the exhaustion etched into her face, the weight of her struggles pressing down on her shoulders. She had been fighting so hard for so long just to survive. And yet, despite everything, she was still standing, still holding on to her son, still pushing forward. The sheer resilience she displayed was both heartbreaking and inspiring. "You are stronger than you know," Keanu said softly, his voice filled with sincerity. "You've been carrying all of this by yourself for so long, but you don't have to anymore. Let me help." Emily looked away, uncertainty flickering in her eyes. "I don't know how to accept help," she admitted, her voice hesitant and fragile. "Every time I've let someone in, it's ended badly. I can't afford to trust the wrong person again. I can't risk it." Keanu nodded, understanding her hesitation. "I won't push you into anything you're not comfortable with. But I can offer you something real, something without conditions. Just a chance to breathe, to not have to worry about tomorrow for once. A moment where you're not constantly fighting just to get through the day." Silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken emotions. Emily rocked Oliver gently in her arms, the baby's soft breathing a reminder of what mattered most. She had been alone for so long, carrying the weight of survival on her shoulders with no one to lean on. Finally, she let out a shuddering breath. "What kind of help?" she asked cautiously, the words tasting foreign on her tongue. Keanu smiled, sensing the small crack in her walls. "A place to stay for a while," he said. "Somewhere warm, with a bed and hot meals. You can take time to figure things out without having to struggle alone. You and Oliver deserve that." Emily hesitated. The offer was almost too good to be true. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Suspicion and hope warred within her, each battling for dominance. Keanu met her gaze, his expression unwavering. "Because I can. And because I believe in kindness. Life has taken a lot from you, but that doesn't mean you have to go through it alone. Sometimes, the hardest thing to do is accept that people genuinely want to help." Tears welled up in Emily's eyes. She wanted to believe him, but fear still clung to her like a second skin. Then Oliver stirred, making a soft sound, and she looked down at him. He deserved better. He deserved safety, stability, a future. And maybe, just maybe, this was the chance to give him that. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." A small, relieved smile crossed Keanu's face. "Let's go," he said gently. They packed up the few belongings she had in the car. Emily moved slowly, as if afraid this fragile moment would shatter if she made the wrong move. Keanu assured her she could return if she ever wanted to, but for now, she had a place to rest. As he drove, Emily glanced out the window, her grip on Oliver tightening. She wasn't sure where this road would lead, but for the first time in a long time, she felt something other than fear. Keanu took them to a small, cozy house, not his main home, but a property he kept for friends and family who needed a quiet place to stay. The moment they stepped inside, Emily felt a warmth she hadn't known in a long time. The scent of fresh linens, the soft glow of a lamp. It felt safe. She set Oliver down gently on the couch, wrapping a blanket around him as he slept peacefully, unaware of the changes happening around him. "You can stay here as long as you need," Keanu said. "There's food in the kitchen, a bedroom for you and Oliver, and no pressure. Just take your time." Emily looked at him, overwhelmed. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to," he replied simply. "Just take care of yourself and Oliver. That's enough." Emily ran her fingers over the fabric of the couch, the reality of this kindness settling in. For months, she had been in survival mode, unable to think past the next hour, the next meal. Now, for the first time in what felt like forever, she could breathe. She could sleep without the constant fear of being asked to leave or having someone knock on her car window in the middle of the night. That night, for the first time in months, Emily and Oliver slept in a real bed. The mattress was soft, the blankets warm, and the silence peaceful. And for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, things could get better. She clutched Oliver close, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing, and let herself drift into the deepest sleep she had experienced in what felt like an eternity. Keanu sat in the living room, staring out the window at the stars. He knew this was just the beginning. Emily had a long road ahead of her, but at least now, she wouldn't have to walk it alone. He had seen the strength in her, the unbreakable will to protect her son. And he knew deep down that she was going to be okay. Because no matter how dark life had been for her, she had finally found a light to guide her forward. Keanu felt his chest tighten as he listened. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Emily," he began, carefully choosing his words, "you're fighting a battle no one should have to face alone, and no one can blame you for that." She lifted her eyes to meet his disbelief evident in her expression. "But I should have figured it out. I should." "You're trying," Keanu interrupted gently. "That's more than many people would do. You're fighting for Oliver. Every single day, and that's something incredible." Emily stayed silent, letting his words sink in finally. She murmured, "What do I do now? I'm at the end of my rope." Keanu looked directly at her, his determination clear. "We'll figure it out together, I promise. Wait here, I'll be back in 20 minutes. Before she could respond, Keanu stood and walked toward his car. He had a plan, and he was determined to change Emily and Oliver's lives forever. As Keanu drove away from the parking lot, Emily watched him in the rearview mirror, her heart torn. Between hope and fear, she wanted to believe he could help her, but life had taught her not to trust so easily. Inside his car, Keanu grabbed his phone and started making calls. He knew he needed to act fast. Whatever came next would be the first step toward transforming Emily's situation and giving her the fresh start she so desperately needed. 40 minutes later, Keanu parked back at the supermarket, his car engine still running. Emily sitting in the old car with Oliver raised her head at the sound. Her eyes held skepticism, but there was also a spark of curiosity. Keanu stepped out of his car and walked toward her, holding a small envelope in his hand. He stopped at a respectful distance and raised the envelope. "I got a room for you and Oliver. It's a simple motel, but it's clean and safe. You can rest there tonight, and tomorrow we'll figure out the next step." Emily stepped out of her car, holding Oliver tightly to her chest. Her eyes shifted between the envelope and Keanu's face, clearly conflicted. "I can't accept this. I don't want charity." "This isn't charity," Keanu replied, his voice firm yet gentle. It's help, we all need help sometimes, please let me do this for you. She hesitated, the weight of exhaustion evident in her posture. Finally, she extended her hand and took the envelope. Inside she found a room key, a note with the motel's address, and some cash for food. She swallowed hard, feeling a mix of relief and shame. Thank you, she said at last, her voice barely audible. Keanu smiled. You're welcome, I'll drive behind you to make sure you get there safely. The motel room was simple, but to Emily it felt luxury. There was a large bed, clean sheets, and a small private bathroom. The soft yellow glow of the bedside lamp created a cozy atmosphere. She gently laid Oliver on the bed and tucked him in carefully. For the first time in weeks, he seemed to sleep deeply, free from the noise and discomfort of the car. Emily sat on the edge of the bed, her eyes welling with tears. As she looked at her son, the tears began to fall uncontrollably. It was the first time in a long while that she felt a semblance of safety, a glimmer of hope. She glanced at the note that came with the key. The simple words written by Keanu echoed in her mind. You're not alone, we're in this together. Outside, Keanu stayed in his car for a few minutes. After dropping Emily off at the motel, he gazed at the night sky, the stars faintly shining against the backdrop of the city. His mind raced with thoughts. He reflected on how Emily's life had reached this point, the injustices she had faced, the daily struggles, and above all, what he could do to truly help her rebuild her life. He knew that offering a comfortable night or a bit of money wasn't enough. She needed something bigger, something that would give her and Oliver a chance at a dignified new beginning. Picking up his phone, he began making more calls. He had resources and connections, and he was determined to use them. We're going to start something big, he murmured to himself as he typed a message to a close friend explaining the situation. No one deserves to go through this alone. Inside the room, Emily tucked Oliver into bed and for the first time in months lay down on a real mattress. Exhaustion quickly took over her body, but before falling asleep she whispered to herself, maybe, just maybe, this is a beginning. Meanwhile, outside, Keanu finished an important call and looked at the lit motel in the distance. A determined smile spread across his face. He knew the next step would be crucial and that he was just beginning his mission to give Emily and Oliver the life they deserved. The next morning, Keanu woke up early, ready to put his plan into action. He had spent the night contacting friends, activating connections, and brainstorming practical solutions to help Emily and Oliver. To him, this wasn't charity, it was about giving her the opportunities she needed to rebuild her life. His first stop was a community center he had supported in the past. Speaking with the director, he explained Emily's situation. She needs temporary housing, social assistance, and if possible, a job. She's a fighter, but she's trapped in a cycle that's hard to break. The director nodded in understanding. We can arrange temporary housing for a few weeks and connect her with social workers. We can also refer her to some job opportunities. Keanu thanked her sincerely, and before leaving, he made a significant donation to the center. He knew Emily's help was the priority, but he wanted to ensure others in similar situations could benefit too. Later that afternoon, Keanu returned to the motel. Emily was sitting on the bed with Oliver in her arms when she heard a soft knock at the door. When she opened it, she found Keanu standing there with a warm smile and a few shopping bags in hand. I brought something for you, he said, handing her the bags. Inside, there were new clothes for her and Oliver, along with a basic hygiene kit. Emily looked at him, clearly moved. I don't know how to thank you. You've already done so much. Keanu shook his head. You don't need to thank me. But if you're ready, I'd like to talk about the next step. She nodded and invited him in. While Oliver played with one of the toys Keanu had left in the car days earlier, Emily sat and listened intently as he explained what he had planned. I found a place for you and Oliver to stay for a few weeks while we organize everything else. It's temporary housing, but safe, and there are people there who can help. Also, I've spoken to some contacts about job opportunities. It all depends on what you're comfortable doing. Emily blinked, stunned. It was hard to believe someone was investing so much in her and Oliver. Why are you doing this for us? She asked, her voice trembling. Keanu paused to think before answering. Because I believe everyone deserves a chance to start over. And because I can. If I have the resources to help, it would be wrong not to use them. Keanu accompanied Emily to the community center, where the director greeted them warmly. The place was simple but welcoming, with clean rooms and a common area for families in need. Emily was shown to a small room with a bed for her and a crib for Oliver. As Emily looked around, taking in the space, Keanu noticed tears welling up in her eyes. "I don't know how to express what this means to me," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't even know if I'll ever be able to repay you." Keanu smiled. "Don't worry about that right now. Focus on you and Oliver. And remember, this isn't charity. It's the beginning of a new chapter." That night, as Emily put Oliver to sleep in his new crib, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Outside, Keanu spoke with the director of the community center, arranging the next steps. "I want to make sure she gets all the support she needs," he said. "And if she needs more time or other opportunities, please let me know." The director smiled. "Don't worry. You've given her something no one else has until now, a chance." As Keanu left the center, he glanced back at the lit building and murmured to himself, "Now she has a starting point. But there's still so much more to do." Weeks went by, and Emily began to settle into a new routine. With the support of the community center and Keanu's connections, she secured a part-time job as a receptionist at a small office. It wasn't just a source of income, it was her first step toward regaining her confidence. On her first day, Keanu walked her to the office door. "This is just the beginning," he said with a reassuring smile. "You're going to do great." Emily entered nervously but was welcomed by warm colleagues and a patient manager who understood her situation. As the days passed, she grew more comfortable, receiving small compliments for her efficiency and kindness. She came home each evening exhausted, but for the first time in a long while, she felt like she was in control of her life. Later that evening, Emily shared an encounter with Keanu. He listened carefully as she explained her decision to allow her in-laws to visit Oliver, on her terms. "You made a difficult but brave choice," Keanu said. "Giving them a chance shows how much you've grown. You're in control now." Emily smiled, feeling more secure than ever. As she watched Oliver playing on the carpet in their small apartment, she knew she was building a future full of possibilities, a future where she was no longer alone. One day, as they sat in a local cafe sharing coffee and small talk, Emily looked at Keanu with a smile that carried equal parts gratitude and determination. "I want you to know that one day, I'm going to pay back everything you've done for me." Keanu smiled, shaking his head. "Emily, you're already paying it back. Every step you take to improve your life and Oliver's is more than enough. I never did any of this expecting something in return." Her smile widened, though her eyes remained serious. "Even so, I want to help others one day, just like you helped me." Keanu nodded. "That's the best way to pay it forward, turning your story into an inspiration for others." That night, as Keanu said his goodbyes and drove home, he glanced up at the starry sky. He knew he hadn't just helped Emily change her life, she had changed his as well. He felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for what they had accomplished together. Emily, in her apartment, tucked Oliver into bed and watched him sleep peacefully. She knew the future would still bring challenges, but for the first time, she felt ready to face them with courage and hope. Her story was far from over, but the next chapter already seemed promising. And as they both moved forward with their lives, they carried with them the certainty that even in the darkest moments, there is always light, often from the most unexpected places. If you enjoyed this story, we have many more that will warm your heart. Click the screen to explore more stories of hope, compassion, and resilience.